Hello and welcome to Thrive for Men. I'm Nat Nissen and I am honoured to be here with Mark Aston, former Channel 10 presenter, sports presenter, and has been in the media since 1980. So Mark has some wonderful stories to tell us. He's a big advocate for mental health. So welcome, Mark. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, Nan. Yes, when you say former Channel 10, it sort of makes me a bit sad, really, but nothing lasts forever. I had a pretty good crack at that. I did Channel 10 for about 20 years. And
I remember I lived in Adelaide and I watched you every night.
Yes, well, thank you. And although when you speak to a Channel 7 person, you probably say the same thing to them, but that's
I
okay. And worked at the ABC prior to that and did some radio. So I guess, I mean, I'm 62 now. I guess, media's been a big part of my life for sure.
You certainly have been, and I know just before we got on the podcast, you did say you don't like the word personality, but
No.
you know, you're very well known and recognised in Adelaide and have a big influence.
Well, thanks, Nan. You know, I don't really, no, I don't like the word personality, or star or anything like that. That really embarrasses me. I can remember my father in the very early stages of my career said to me, now, make sure that if someone comes up and they want your autograph or they want to talk to you, you make sure you give them the time of day and smile and do all those things, which obviously I did. But I think even he was worried that I wouldn't handle that aspect of the job that well. I mean, I did handle that well, but and maybe a conversation for another time, but I just think sometimes, particularly with Australians of the Year and major awards, I think there are a lot of people who are a lot more, I don't want to be controversial, but there's a lot more people who I think are far more deserving of those sorts of awards than people who are just on TV, read an auto cue or just because they've got a profile. I guess that's probably a better way of saying it. I don't mean to be disrespectful.
I do agree with you. I'm not big on celebrities. I'm not one for people just liking people or listening to people because they happen to be on TV. But I think it's different in your case, because when I was in Adelaide, you did a lot in the community and you're sharing your story and you're still doing a lot in the community, helping people. So I think that's a big difference between a lot of the celebrities that we see now.
Possibly, Nat, although I would say that, to be absolutely fair, I would say that most of those people who are on telly and a lot of them who are on radio here in Adelaide and in print do a lot of stuff as well around the place. But yeah, it's hey, but having said all of that, I've been very lucky to do a job that, as my father said, a lot of people would kill for. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
And look, before we get started, I just wanted to say that Thrive for Men is obviously a men's podcast, a men's health program. So when we speak about anything tonight, we're not disregarding anything to do with any other gender. We're not disregarding anything to do with anyone else that may be experiencing any other challenges or health issues. This is just about men's health, Thrive for Men. So when we speak about anything tonight, again, we're not disregarding anyone else or what anyone else is going through. If you're not a man, we are just focusing on men's health in this program.
Yep.
So would you mind sharing a little bit about your story and mental and emotional health?
Yeah, sure. So, I worked in the media up until 4 years ago, and then I got very unwell as a result of alcohol and drug abuse, and that was probably as a result of mental health issues that I've had all my life. But I still make no excuses for any of the things that I did that I feel bad about or I feel shame about. And
you were able to function though, weren't you?
I was only just though, as it got closer to when I finally left Channel 10, I was barely functioning really. It's difficult to explain, but it was such an effort. And I guess the best way to explain that, Nant, is I was wearing a mask, and to most people I was fine. In fact, I was more than fine. I was funny, I was humorous, I was good at my job, but behind that mask it was just getting more and more difficult, and eventually the mask fell off, and then obviously I left Channel 10, and then this is as a result of, as I say, drug addiction and alcohol, mental health. 12 months later, I left 5AA, which was the radio station I was working for. Just after that, my marriage broke up, sadly, which obviously spiraled me even more. Then I lived by myself for 12 months and for 2 years, actually, which was a complete disaster. Got even worse. I didn't really work. I did a few things, became very irresponsible. And then 2 years ago, hope everyone can follow this, 2 years ago, I sat down with my sister and a very dear friend, and they didn't insist because I had to make the call. They said, what about rehab? And so I went to rehab for 3 months, and I'm pleased to say, I mean, I've still got things I need to work on, no doubt about that. It's important I say that, but I haven't had a drink or used drugs for 2 years. So,
well done. That is amazing. It takes a lot of courage to not only do it but share it.
Yeah, well, thank you. I think it takes more courage to do it, to be honest. I don't have a problem sharing it because I'm a very public figure, and I don't mean that in an egotistical way, but everyone sort of basically knew what happened. So, and I'm certainly not sharing my story, to make money or to be a hero or to. I'm doing it for a couple of reasons. I do it. There's probably 3 reasons. One of them's selfish. I do it because it helps me.
Mm-hmm.
2, I do it because I do genuinely want to help others. And that's a bit cliched, but if I can help one person, at least make a call in their life that will enable them to not go down the path I went, well, then that's a win. And the 3rd reason, which is not as important, but it also partly keeps me accountable. I mean, it depends on your addiction and how strong the addiction is. And as I say, I make no bones about this. I'm still working on other things that I need to really rein in, but nowhere near as dangerous as what I was doing. But when you do go public, it does help in some ways, just your accountability, because particularly if you're talking about it, then I mean, you've just got to walk the walk. Otherwise,
absolutely. Do you find you've got a lot of support out there? When you go out on the street and people recognise you?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I do, Nan. I do, and that's nice. I'm not particularly sure that, when it's all done and dusted for me, I'll look back and say, I guess the best way to put it is I'd rather not have the support because I'd rather have not gone through the issue, if you understand what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's nice to get the support. I'm sure there's some people that think I'm doing it for the wrong reasons, or, they're naysayers or maybe whatever, and that's fine. And I'm sure there are some employees, possibly, some potential employers, I should say, over the last 2 years that have probably thought, yeah, we'd like to employ him, but so there's disadvantages in going public as well. But overall, yeah, the comments have been nice, and I take them humbly, and yeah, I'm pleased that that hopefully I can make a difference to one person is better than none.
Absolutely. So can you tell me, what do you think? Where do you think men's mental and emotional health sits at the moment? Obviously, COVID's a whole nother, and the lockdowns are a whole nother experience that we're not used to. But where do you think it is at the moment with that, and how do we help men more?
And that's a really key question, isn't it? I think, obviously it's impossible for me to answer that question, with any significant authority or fact or background knowledge. But in a general sense, I feel as though one of the issues that is facing men, and it might be some women, but I think ostensibly men, is that because of that reputation that you're supposed to, and this is, again, it's nothing new, but because of that reputation of having to be the breadwinner, particularly people out in the regions, out in the country regions, like farmers and stuff like that. But in a general sense, because the male is supposed to be the dominant one, and that is shifting, as we know, which is a good thing, I think, because males feel that, they have less of an inclination then to want to talk about it. And the danger of not talking about it means that it will, or it can, fester and intensify to a point where, I'd rather not say it directly, but, the absolute worst can happen.
Absolutely.
God forbid. But at the very least, it can mean that mask I mentioned earlier, goes on early is double bolted on because they're absolutely frightened for a whole range of reasons to not expose themselves as they really are. And to give you a very brief good example, when I did a talk about 12 months ago to a whole lot of senior sergeants at the South Australian Police Force. And afterwards, a lot of them came up, and I just basically told my story. And just to make it clear, I don't get up there and say, don't do drugs, don't drink alcohol, don't do this. I don't do that. All I simply say is, if you do it, there's a chance that what may happen that happened to me may happen to you. And then if you want to head down the path that I went down for such a long time, then do it, but just understand it's a pretty horrific path. So I just want to make that clear. I don't say don't do anything. I just explain what happens if things intensify.
Yeah.
But anyway, a couple of the senior sergeants came up to me afterwards and said, that's fantastic. Thank you. It's great that someone understands how we feel. And what that told me was that there were a lot of people in that room who were going through a similar situation to me, some worse, some not as bad. But because for whatever reason they didn't want to say anything, and that might have been pride, it might have been ego, it might have been concern about having to see the boss, and the boss saying, well, hang on, I don't know whether so-and-so wants to work with you anymore if you're sort of coming out and saying you're not that well. I mean, you guys are out on foot together, so there's a whole range of
do you think
reasons.
That's a really good point. Do you think that's still a really big factor in the workplace? Because, mental health has become a really big something that's noticed, and the importance of it is noticed now in the workplace, but people are still very hesitant to speak up about their mental health in the workplace because of, is that going to stop them getting a promotion? Does that mean people won't want to work with them? Does that mean if something's running late, they're going to blame it on their mental health? Do you think that's still a big issue?
Absolutely, I do. Absolutely, I do, Nant. And
how do we tackle that in the workplace?
Well, I think that has to come from leadership. And I think, and it's easy to say that, but, leaders, CEOs, general managers, people who are in charge of groups of people need to understand what you just said then, at the very least. Then they need to understand, so there's a lot of training that needs to go on here. Then they need to understand how to identify it, for example.
Yeah.
If they feel as though someone is going through a tough time, then they need to be empathetic, because if they're a hard boss, they may identify it and pull the person in and say, well, you just got to get yourself well.
Absolutely.
And that's not good
and that's
enough.
The worst thing that you could do.
Totally. And I think they have to educate everyone in the office. So I think it's a bulk responsibility, but it starts at the top. And that sort of stuff is not natural to a lot of people. I mean, a lot of people just don't know how to handle. A lot of bosses are very poor bosses anyway, and they're poor communicators. I'm not saying every boss, obviously, but a lot of them are. So you can imagine how they would handle communicating with a staff member that they either have identified as having a few mental health issues, or someone's come to them and said, I think so-and-so is having a few mental health issues. You need to talk to him. I mean, some people would have no clue about how to do that.
Absolutely.
And how to do that. Sorry, Nat, and how to do that, in a way that's going to be totally comfortable for the person they're talking to.
And confidential. Yeah.
Totally.
Providing that safe environment.
That's a great point. And that's another really good point, because a lot of people don't trust their boss.
Absolutely.
And if you don't trust your boss, you're not going to go to him with a problem, or her to a problem like this, because you'll probably think, and you might be paranoid if you're going through all this, so you might be super paranoid about losing a job or someone else taking it. So that's one reason you might not go. But if you don't trust your boss, then you're probably not going to go, because, and particularly if your boss is untrustworthy, because you'll get counselled, and then, well, you may get counselled, and then 2 days later, everyone will be talking about you in the office. Now, that can only make things worse.
Absolutely. And in bigger companies, I know I've spoken to a lot of people over the years that just won't go to HR. They do actually provide a counselling service, but they just won't do it in-house because they don't trust that their information will be kept confidential.
There's a real estate agency in Adelaide. I don't know whether others are doing it. They may well be, but Harris Real Estate, Phil Harris runs Harris Real Estate. And I know Phil quite well. I'm not a personal friend of his, but we were talking about this 6 months ago, and it's one of, if not his most crucial what's the word I'm after? Programs, identification type things. That things is not quite the right word, obviously, but sort of touch points within his business, because he said, Mark, my absolute responsibility is the health, physical and mental health of my staff, because without that, they can't function. And he said, that's no good to me. Now, he didn't mean that in a selfish way or a profit-driven way. He just meant that his responsibility is to make sure that everyone that works there is well, is happy, because that makes for a far better environment.
Wouldn't the world be a much better place with leaders like that?
Absolutely. And I give him full marks for that. And it's a wonderful thing, but it's not happening anywhere near enough. In fact, and again, perhaps this is a conversation for another time, these days, not so much just recently, but leading up to COVID 18 months, 2 years ago, particularly in the media, and I'll give you the media example, and I'm sure it happened everywhere else, staff were less, people had to do more for the same or for less. I mean,
blood from a stone type of.
Where does that end?
Yes.
I mean, seriously, where does that end? And some companies, I mean, if I was working in a company where I had to do extra work and I was more stressed and I was getting the same amount of money, or they might even cut the money, cut your wages because things are so tight, and they'll package that up in such a way where they'll say, everyone needs to take a cut, otherwise we're just not going to continue.
Yes.
And you get so stressed, and then all of a sudden you either have a breakdown or you lose your job because you can't keep up. I mean, where does that end? And sorry, the point I was going to make there is, if you do put your hand up and say, I can't handle this anymore, and you leave, they'll just get someone else in who can do it or who needs the job. And I don't think
so. You're just a number.
Yeah, precisely, Nan. And that happens a lot too. And companies will say that you're not a number, and they'll have staff meetings, and they'll have parties, and they'll have get-togethers and workshops, but they're just hiding behind all of that. That's for a lot of companies anyway. I'm not saying for all, but for a lot of companies, you are just a number, and that's really sad. And that's not the way to build a company. It's not the way to build a culture. You build a really good culture, and anything. Adelaide Crows were a great example of everyone being on the bus, as Neil Craig used to say, when they won the 2 flags.
Yeah.
They weren't the best side, but everyone was on the bus.
Yes.
Everyone was happy. Everyone was. They weren't necessarily fit. There were injuries, but a few. Everyone was traveling in the same direction. There was no gossiping. Everyone was supporting each other. Everyone loved coming to work, and they won 2 flags. They weren't the best side, but they won 2 flags. You could be the best side, but if you've got a bad culture, you might not make the 8. To put it in a football parlance.
Absolutely. I remember there's an old adage, it's only business. And I've only ever heard that when people behave poorly. Yeah. And, I after a few times of having people behave poorly around me and saying, oh, it's just business, I used to think, hang on a second, but businesses are made up of people. It's not just business. It's
Absolutely.
People.
100%.
It doesn't make sense to say it's just business. It doesn't 100%. Work. That's not an out.
No, and it's not accepted these days. That's a good observation, Nan, and or it's not personal.
Exactly. It's just business. No, it is. We're people. Business is just people dealing with other people in a business setting.
And I guess as we're talking about this specifically, I think I do seriously believe that the fragility of all of us on the globe has taken a dip. Well, we know that. We know that. I mean, that's and as a result of that, people who run companies and businesses, and they've taken a dip with their anxieties as well. I understand that. But to make that company or business work, and if you park the financial side of it for the time being, to make it work, I think the model has to change. I don't know what the answer is. So there's no point you asking me how, what's that model specifically, but I think the model has to change dramatically, because people are less resilient these days, and I'm not saying they're more selfish, but to a large degree they're thinking more about themselves rather than giving, and that's not a selfish thing. It's just the way we are at the moment. It's just
much less community driven.
Much
less value driven, and it's more people just, I think when people get in survival mode, it's just about me and being afraid. And unfortunately, I think when you get anxious about things, it can spiral very quickly out of control. You know, that even chemically, the brain has processes that just triggers another negative thought and triggers another one and another one. So it's something that I think we really need to recognize, not only in the workplace, but, you know, I was going to mention to you, as things have changed over the years with the role of the female in society and in the home, working more, sharing more duties around the house, etc. How do you think that's affected men and their place? Because I often get the feeling that a lot of men I speak to are a little bit confused at their place in society now. Even, you know, if we use a really silly example, which I still, perhaps silly is the wrong word, but simple example, I still see and hear men say, look, do I open a door for a female or not? Because, and I've seen this, I saw this when I owned a gym. I saw a man open a door for a female and she got angry with him. So what do men do? Is that affecting their mental health?
Well, the first thing I'd say about that is, and I know this is fundamentally, obviously, dealing with men, but I do need to say this. I say good on those women who are pushing themselves now, and I guess in an awkward sort of a way, I'm saying that I think for too long women have been trodden on, to be honest.
Yes.
And I think that's really important that I say that. And, you know, why shouldn't there be 3 women on a board or 5 women on a board and only 3? I mean, why? You know, you can't. Anyway, that's that. I just wanted to make that clear.
Yes,
but in
thank
answering
you.
but in answering your question though, Nan, I think guys are confused, and I think part of the reason that they're confused is because of that push by women to have an equal say. And as I say, I think that's a good thing. So. Do you, and it's a good example. Do you open the door for a woman now, or is she going to get offended and say, "What are you doing that for? I've got 2 arms."
Yes.
I mean, yes, I think guys are confused. And I think that, I'm not sure whether, I mean, sure, that's a good example. I'm not sure examples like that specifically are confusing guys, but I think the broader issue.
The broader picture, yes.
Yeah, that's right. And I think the fact that women are sticking up for their rights and obviously, you know, speaking out about very significant issues, I think that probably is not so much confusing guys. I think they're sort of being knocked off their pedestal a bit. And again, yes. I make this clear. I don't think that's a bad thing. It's just that guys aren't necessarily handling it that well. That's all.
And they haven't been taught to handle that. I don't think anyone's reaching out to them and saying, hey, this is the way the world is now.
Yes.
This is how to handle it.
Look, absolutely. And yeah, and that's how a lot of them have been brought up. I know I'm generalizing there, but a lot of them have been brought up that way. I mean, getting back to those people who live on a farm, you know, the cliche family is the father, the 2 sons dominating with the daughter or the 2 daughters and the mother staying home and cooking.
Absolutely. And that's all they do. They cook and the men go out and farm and they come out and eat.
And they love doing that. But, you know, is that right for that to be the model? Absolutely not. No way. So, I do think that there's probably a lot of that is contributing to guys' mental health. But I do get back to that point I made earlier. I think probably the most significant reason that, and I know we're talking about guys here, but I think the most significant reason that guys are struggling with their mental health, and I get back to that point I made earlier, Nan, and that is that they just have trouble talking about it.
Yes.
They probably have trouble recognizing it, and they have trouble seeking help on their own. You know, gee, I haven't felt well for 6 months. I think I'll go to the doctor. I mean, I'm sure there's a low percentage of guys that do that. But even if a mate talks to a guy, or even if a guy talks to, I'll give you a good example in a second. Even if a guy talks to, I don't know, his wife or, you know, his mum or his teacher, whoever it might be, even if that happens, I still think there's that doubt in their mind and that this is weak.
Yes.
And this is going to affect me in other ways that are more significant. This is in their heads, that are more significant than if I get help. But if they understood that to get help is brave, yes, is extremely sensible, and in the long run, and it can take time, in the long run, they're going to be better off anyway. If they understood that, and the sad thing is, I guess the only way to understand that is to go through something like I went through in a way.
Absolutely. And you're right. I spoke to a friend of mine who's a doctor the other day, and he said, it's still a problem. Men, for any reason, still are incredibly hesitant to just come and speak about any part of their health and see a doctor or any kind of health practitioner.
Yeah.
So, even reaching out is something I think we need to help men with.
Yeah.
But as you said, the feeling of weakness and the feeling of this is not how I was brought up. You need to stiff up a chin, and being vulnerable is weak. I think that's something that not only the community needs to help them with, but as a female, I think we can really help men understand being more vulnerable is a strength.
Yes, and that's a very wise thing to say, and it's a very powerful thing to say, and that is so far the most important thing I think that either one of us have said, that it is a strength. And I'm glad you said that, and I hope that people listening hear that and understand it and believe it. And to that end, there's a friend of mine who's become a friend of mine recently, Nat, and he was working for a building company, and he was running it, not a building company, construction on the roads, and they were rebuilding some roads, and it's a huge company. He was the boss. There were pressures from the government. There were a whole range of things, and it tipped him over the edge. And he was very close to ending it all. But what he did was he spoke to his wife about it, and that saved his life. And that's now
very powerful.
Yeah, he's now well. He does a lot of public speaking in Adelaide. And he's the gentlest guy you'd ever meet. He had a beautiful daughter, had a beautiful daughter at the time that he was thinking of doing all this. And he didn't go initially to his wife, but finally did. And then they went to counselling, and the company supported him brilliantly. And he's doing so well, and I'm so pleased. And the reason that happened is because he went and spoke to his wife.
He went and spoke to his wife, who gave him that safe space. I mean,
Totally.
that's all you need, isn't it? You need one person to give you that safe space to be vulnerable. And
well, that's right. And getting back to that early discussion we had about bosses sitting in an office, with a big chair, and the guy wanders in and sits down in the small chair and says, "I'm not feeling well. I'm mentally unwell." Part of that skill, part of the training toward that boss is to teach them to be empathetic, and to teach them to understand, and to teach them not to judge, and to ask the right questions, and to say the right things. I think we probably have a bit of a handle on that, but not everyone does.
Do you think we're doing enough in the media with ads on TV about mental health and etc., especially at the moment?
No, I don't. I mean, we're doing a bit, but up until recently, it hasn't been sexy. But now it is a bit trendy.
Yes.
There are stories now. For example, there are actually. That's an interesting question you ask, because as I'm answering, I'm thinking, I don't know whether I actually have seen any commercials on it or any public announcements, but obviously there's a reasonable amount of stories being done on television news or breakfast shows, Sunrise or Today, and in print and on radio, but still nowhere near enough. And my concern about particularly TV stories is, and this is not really the network's fault, but particularly with TV news, those stories are too short. They're a minute and a half long, they're 90 seconds long, and you can't explain an issue in 90 seconds. They're better placed on a breakfast show like Today or Sunrise, where you can get into the issue for 15, 20 minutes or 10 minutes or something like that, so people get a real feel for it. It's very difficult to portray that in a minute and a half story on a news service. But in answering your question, I don't think, particularly now that you've got me thinking, I don't think I've really seen any public announcements or commercials, certainly on TV. I've heard a couple of commercials on radio publicising mental health services and stuff like that, but nothing really where you actually hear from someone who's been affected.
Yes.
Which is interesting. It's a bit like going to a conference on mental health, and the only people you hear from are professors and
They've got the book knowledge, but
practitioners, but not people who have lived experience.
And without that experience, it doesn't really touch a lot of people, does it?
It doesn't. No, it doesn't. And that's, and again, that's a great conversation for another time. But if any people who are running conferences on mental health are listening, make sure you have people, standing in front of the microphone who have got lived experience, because trust me,
you don't know it until you've gone through it.
There is no one that knows it better. I mean, sure, I'm not, there to tell people what tablets to take or how the brain works, but I can certainly tell you how Mark Aston worked during that time.
Absolutely. And look, I know where you're very, very busy, so I don't want to take up too much of your time.
Well,
but I just want to ask a few more questions, if that's okay.
Of course it is. Yeah.
Look, social media, you're on social media, you're on Facebook, LinkedIn. How do you think social media, and obviously this wouldn't just be for men, but how do you think social media is affecting the men?
Are you talking about social media in general, Nan?
Yeah, you get on social media and you might say something and someone snaps back. You're already anxious. You're already feeling uncertain. A lot of people are fighting in quite an aggressive way at the moment. It's quite divisive. So as someone who does experience mental health issues, how do you deal with social media?
Well, your initial question I'll answer, and that is, I don't think social media is good for people who have mental health issues. If they're into social media, in a way where they're taking photos of their food, or they're getting involved in a discussion and things get out of hand, or they're doing that sort of, low level sort of stuff that, I mean, I take photos of Toby, but, I very rarely do that sort of stuff. Most of my social media is around mental health, or it's around my business. But I know through experience, and, again, I can give you an example where a good friend of mine, very good friend of mine, worked at Channel 10, is an outstanding presenter. He's not at 10 anymore. And we'd do an event, a national event, and the first thing he'd go to, I don't know why, was he'd go onto the website and have a look at the comments. And you know what it's like now. You could do the best job in the world. You could be the best looking person in the world. You could have, there will be the naysayers. And they're
absolutely vicious.
And every time he would walk out of the office afterwards, I would look at him and I would know, yep, he's been reading those comments. It really affected him, but he was addicted to it. So I know it's a long-winded answer. I think if you've got mental health issues and you're on social media to do, again, low-level stuff's not quite the right phrase, but you know what I'm talking about, the stuff that
absolutely
really doesn't matter.
Absolutely. That's right. The stuff that doesn't matter.
It doesn't really matter. Then what you're doing is, it's a bit like, walking down a street, walking down a street in Richmond when you haven't used for 6 months, but knowing that if you walk down that street, one of your old dealers is going to come up to you and say, hey, do you want to have a hit or something like that? I hope that's a good enough analogy. So in other words, you know that you're probably going to get into trouble on social media, so don't do it. And you're right. The comments can be atrociously personal, atrociously upsetting. And frankly, most of the time, they're not true, or it tells you more about the person that's putting up the comments than it does about you. So
absolutely.
Why bother?
And again, I think it's the point of, women speak to each other a lot more. So you might, as a woman, ring your friend or text your friend and say, hey, have a look at this, that person made me feel really terrible. But as a man, perhaps you're expected to just be able to deal with this and not speak about it. But you can't help but impact how you feel. For me, it's like watching a horror movie. I don't watch them because they make me anxious and fearful. So, you know, I don't watch the NCIS cop shows
Yeah.
because they scare me.
So Nan, you wouldn't be interested in watching the giant claw from 1956?
I don't even know what it is, but it
Oh,
sounds.
it's one of them. No, don't. It's about a huge bird, and with and he was massive, and he was eating people, and people were getting out of planes in parachutes. And he was eating. Don't watch that. It'll give
I
you
would have
really
nightmares. I
yeah.
actually have nightmares about things I watch.
Don't get involved in that. But no, but getting back to more serious things, you're right. It's you know, it's a very anxious world out there, and it's even more intense when you dive into social media. And it's, I mean, you know, Taylor Walker, when he was going through that really bad patch about 2 years ago, and you know, like there were times where, I mean, honestly, there were people who thought, and fair enough, they thought, God, how's he getting in the team? He's playing so badly. And it was like, it was the end of his career. I mean, he's done such a wonderful job since. But I don't know how he got around that. I really don't. I don't know whether he just turned social media, although he is on social media himself. But some of the comments that I read about, I didn't go into social media to have a look, but some of the comments I read when they were being reported in the news were just horrendous. I mean, there's a guy who, and I hope this is not too long-winded, and for those people who are watching interstate, or, you know, if you're in Sydney or Queensland, you know, Taylor Walker was our captain. You know, he's been a wonderful player for the Crows, but he had a really lean patch, and it went for 12 months. And the stuff that was being said about him was just deplorable. I mean, for him to get through that plus turn things around is just unbelievable.
It's a different world.
It is, and it's really destructive. But I just make the point that, you know, Taylor got back into form and he's doing so well now, and his career was over last year and he's turned it around. He didn't just turn his form around because he would have read some of these things in the paper. He turned his mentality around. And I think, I mean, I know Taylor quite well, but, you know, not well enough to know what's in his head, but he must have turned his head around as well. Because he would have seen those comments, or people would have mentioned them. And I mean, they were just despicable. They were just so insensitive. But yeah, I think
it's we're so disconnected on social media that we actually forget there's another human at the end of the end of our post or our, you know. And I think it's so important for anyone, but especially those with mental health challenges of any kind, which is a large majority of the population at some point, to stand guard at the door of your mind. You know, you've got to watch what you're putting in and what you're allowing in without being uninformed. You know, in no way do I suggest people become uninformed about what's happening in the world. But I really think we need to be a little bit more careful about what we're taking in.
I think the other point that needs to be made, though, is that there is a percentage of people who are terrible on social media who are suffering mental health issues themselves.
Yes, that's a very good point.
Or they might be drinking, or they might be using, they might be so, you know, they might be in a total. But there are, as we know, there are also people who are just naysayers, who are just negative, glass half empty, don't like, you know, they're jealous, they don't like to see someone do well. And to be fair, you know, there are obviously people who don't want to see Tex do well because they're a Port supporter. I get all of that, but your point's a good one, and that is, you know, certainly if you're thinking straight and you're saying something nasty, just think. I can remember, Nan, about I was on 5AA doing weekends about last Christmas, and look, I don't say this to boast, but there was a lot of people who were emailing and saying, "Oh, hi Mark," because they knew my story. It's great to hear you back. You know, I hope you're well. Blah blah blah. Had one guy saying, you know, you just don't know what you're talking about, and I'll never forget it. He said, "You sound as though you've just been pulled out of the gutter." And yeah. And look, it didn't really upset me at the time. It doesn't upset me now, but it did upset me about an hour afterwards. But the interesting thing was, like a year prior, I was pulled out of the gutter, like metaphorically speaking.
Yes.
And so I said on air, and I did it, and I didn't want to be aggressive. I said, look, and I think his name was Brian. I said, Brian, Look, I don't, you can text and say whatever you want. He texted it in on our email, or he emailed it in. And I said, that's fine. But I said, I have to be honest with you and say that it's extremely nasty and really personal. And I did it in a way where I wasn't aggressive. But the point I made was, I was quite proud of myself, actually. I said, Brian, I don't know whether you've got kids, but I'm just, and this is all I said. And then I went to a break. I said, how do you feel about showing that email that you sent to me to your kids? And if they're 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, I'd be interested in what they think of what you just did.
That's a fantastic point.
Well, it was just, and I look, again, he might have had mental health issues. He might have been high on cocaine.
But as you said before, it says more about the poster, but that perhaps would have made him double think.
Well, I hope it did, because the interesting thing was, and I don't think he necessarily said it because he used that word out of the gutter, but I don't think he quite understood how much that affected me an hour later after the show finished, because I thought, God, that was pretty nasty. And I was, metaphorically speaking, dragged. Actually, I was in the gutter, so it could have affected me a lot worse and tipped me over the edge. Who knows? And it probably would have 12 months before that, now. Yeah. But I was in a good space then. So, but I thought I handled that well. But I'd be interested to know, what would your kids or your wife think if you showed them that and said, guess what? I just sent that to Mark Aston. He's on air. I mean, if they said, oh, good on you, Dad, that's great. Well, that's fine. But I'd be surprised if they did.
I'd be very surprised.
I'd sort of hope they'd say, oh, Dad, what
are you doing?
Why'd you do that?
Yeah.
But, anyway.
Now, as a former sports reporter, I have to ask you, I know it's a little bit off topic, not specifically about men, but, you used to report about athletes continuously. How do you feel about the athletes at the moment that are going through mental health issues, and it's happening a lot lately, or we're hearing more about it? I'm sure it's happened a lot in the past and we just didn't hear about it. After reporting on it for so many years, what are your thoughts on what's been happening with Simone, the Olympics, all of the people that are experiencing mental health challenges in sport?
Well, I have been reporting on and doing stories on athletes. I mean, not recently, obviously, but up until 4 years ago, for a long time. And you know what, Nan? I don't reckon I can't remember one story about mental health.
Wow.
With one of them, I can't. But what that says, though, is that times have changed, because there's no way that less people back then, well, perhaps less people than now for the last 2 years because of COVID, but people are still going through issues. It doesn't discriminate. Mental health doesn't discriminate.
That's right.
And you know what I'm talking about there. But just to elaborate on that, what I sort of mean is that there's a view that, and a good example is when Buddy Franklin, I was going to say Buddy Holly, when Buddy Franklin was going through that issue 4 or 5 years ago, and he took time off for mental health, I can remember someone saying, I can't understand why Buddy's got mental health issues. He's tall. I think he even said he's got a nice coloured skin, not being disrespectful.
Yeah,
he's got a nice tan. Yeah. He's got a beautiful girlfriend. He's got a lovely car. He's got plenty of money. He's high profile. All of that's totally irrelevant. That
there's nothing to do with that.
Just because, and again, it gets back to our point that, we didn't say this on the podcast, but we're talking about, we did actually, about, being a personality and hating the idea of being called a star. It sort of puts you on a pedestal. And I think what people do is, up until recently anyway, they felt that, if Nant, is a star athlete going to Japan, then she's impenetrable.
Yes.
Everything's fine in her life. Sure, she's had to work hard and she's got a bit of pressure and all that, but everything's fine. But we now know that it doesn't matter whether you're a gynecologist or whether you're a dentist or a vet or an athlete or someone on the street, it doesn't matter who you are. You are not immune from mental health issues. It doesn't discriminate in any way, shape, or form. And so I think one good thing, it's not good that more people are having mental health issues, but I think it's good now that society is understanding that this doesn't discriminate. And so I think they're less amazed when someone high profile comes out and says, I'm not well.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good thing, because I think it's
Absolutely.
going to encourage more people to do it.
Now, when I was growing up, there's certainly, I didn't hear anything about men's mental health or women's mental health. It wasn't something that was spoken of. And we certainly didn't have any stats. Now we're hearing a lot about it's really a big problem in society, in our community, men's mental health, and the rates at which people are taking things into their own hands. Do you think that, now it's a little bit different over the last 18 months, obviously that's changed a few things, but do you think that over the years mental health has become more of an issue, or do you think that it has always been an issue, especially for men? We're speaking about Thrive for Men, but we just didn't speak about it then.
That's a really good question, and you probably didn't. You asked a question, but there's probably two answers. I think mental health is a massive problem. I really do. Clearly over the last 2 years, it's intensified. But just going back to part of that question, having said that, I think it's slow, but I think there is more of a propensity now for two things: for help, and that's slow, but there's an awareness of the fact that we need more help, and also there's more of an inclination, but it's slow again, for more people to come out and talk about it, because it is being talked about. But it's snail's pace, though, Nan. That's the point I'm making. It's snail's pace. But the overarching answer to that is, and I don't say this to boast, not at all. I just had the opportunity to talk to senior politicians here, and I see what Jacinda Ardern does in New Zealand, and she knows that mental health over there is really the foundation to their society. But I've had the opportunity to talk to senior politicians, and my view is, and maybe it's theirs, but up until now it hasn't been sexy, mental health, as I said earlier, but my view is that in 10 years' time, in 20 years' time, if we don't do something about this, but something really serious, then there's going to be, the anxiety levels are going to be up here.
Yes.
There are going to be more people who suffer. It's going to have far-reaching effects, and one of those effects is going to be the economy.
Absolutely.
Because if people can't work, well, then, I mean, like me, I couldn't work for 4 years. Well, what's the use of advertising jobs if people are going to fill the jobs? There's going to be more crime. Less people are going to be spending money. More people will be on pensions or on disability pensions or whatever that, you know what I'm talking about.
Absolutely.
Certain pensions where if you're unwell, you just get a. So economically, it's going to be a disaster. And that's not really even talking about, obviously, the key point, and that is people will be unwell.
Absolutely.
But I don't think governments, no.
The pressure on our health system will be incredible.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And you articulated that well, and that's what I meant. But the problem is, and I think we did talk about this prior, before the podcast, the problem is, from a political point of view, it's not a quick fix. And as we're leading up, for example, to an election here, the Premier is going to want to do things where people can see the results quickly because they want to get more votes, they want to get in. So, and they'll never admit this, but they're not going to do something that's going to be that's going to have an effect in 10 years if they do it now, because it doesn't help them. It doesn't help them win their election, if that makes sense. Right. I know that sounds simplistic.
No, you've said it perfectly.
Do you understand? And Jacinda Ardern, I don't know, obviously I don't know Jacinda, but I read a lot about her, and maybe she's got her flaws in certain areas politically, I don't know. But all I know is that she has spent billions on mental health because she understands that without a well society, it can't run properly, and it will crumble to a certain level. It may not crumble completely, but it will crumble. And I just don't think, I think the politicians understand that, but I don't think, if you got them all in a room, I think they'd say, yeah, Mark, we understand that.
But what do we do?
What do we do? You know, I mean, it's going to cost us, it's going to cost us billions to fix it, even if it takes us 10 years. And if we spend billions, other services are going to have to suffer, you know, transport or whatever it is. So there's a dilemma there, but I just don't think they quite, maybe they do, but I feel as though if something's not done about it, it's going to be, I don't want to paint, I suppose I am painting a pretty bleak picture, but it needs to be addressed, but not like we're addressing it now. It needs to be addressed so much more. My vocabulary is not great, but just so much more intellectually, or intellectually, it's not the right word. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. So much more thoughtfully, insightfully, with education and guidance and support. And I think people also miss the fact that, I don't know if you'd agree with this, but I certainly know that when I had mental health challenges, when I was very ill, you know, which came first, being sick and then, or the other way. But when you do have mental health challenges, it affects other parts of your health. You know, you can't get out of bed. You're experiencing chronic pain. You have gut issues. You have headaches. There are so many other issues that go along, and you know, it is the chicken or the egg with a lot of people. You know, what came first, but it all goes together. So you're right that, you know, if we don't tackle this properly, there won't be anyone working in 10 years.
No,
it's not.
You're right, and some people might think, well, that's a bit over the top, but you know, that's my view.
I think it's an epidemic. I really think it's something that we have to tackle now. It's at a peak of it's at a crucial point that we reach out and help people. And you know, whether we need to do that in the community, at a government level, at a local council level, at obviously a workplace level where a lot of people spend a lot of their time, providing safe places for them at home. And you know, even the media needs, I think, to get involved. And
that's a great point.
I mean, they you know, we listen to the media all the time. There are ads. If you watch the Olympics, which I've been enjoying, there are ads every 5 minutes, it seems like. So why aren't there some ads that can help people feel more comfortable about mental health and help, you know, reach out, etc.?
I agree, Nan. And yeah, no, you're right. And I think it gets back to our original point. And that is that, and I think it is an epidemic, but it's an epidemic that we don't necessarily see. It's not like people are walking around with broken legs or broken arms.
Absolutely. It would be much easier if it was.
Well, that's exactly right. But I think if we stood in the mall in the Adelaide, where are you, Melbourne or
Melbourne?
If you went to what is it, Square?
Fed Square.
I was going to say Times Square. If you went to Fed Square and there was 70 people there walking past, and you were able to stop them all for a second, and you said, hands up those who feel completely well, it would be a very low number.
Absolutely.
Same as if I did it in say, the mall in the city, but we can't see them. And to make it worse, people, if they were honest, they put their hand up. But to make it worse, they're not being honest because they're putting the mask on, which is what we spoke about at the start.
Absolutely.
Which is only making them worse.
Which are men are so good at. They've been taught.
Brilliant. Well, I was brilliant at it. You know, no one had any idea what was going on. Well, only my close friends, but no one had any idea. And that's and it's not fair. It's not fair, and it's not healthy. And it just makes things worse.
And I mean, as I said before, I know you're very, very busy, and I'd love to speak with you again. But just one more question. Specifically, obviously, we're speaking about men, and the stats would say that men have a higher rate of mental health challenges or wanting to deal with it themselves in ways that are harmful. With no disrespect to the women who also experience mental health challenges, what are some ways from your experience in either dealing with yourself or dealing with others that someone could have seen something and reached out. How do we see this in our men, and possibly, you know, just see a little trigger that we can possibly reach out and help?
That's a really good question. And I, how do I say this without sounding a smart aleck?
No, just sound smart aleck.
No, I don't know. Yeah, I think I'm good at that. And the reason, and you'll know why, I think I'm good at it because I did it.
Yes.
And I'm aware as well. There are a lot of people working in offices who just aren't aware. They're doing their job. If they're the boss, it's just all about figures and numbers and finance and making it. So you've got to be aware in the first instance, or you've got to be looking. I think, but to answer your question specifically, it's a matter of looking beyond what you see, which sounds a bit twee, I know, but it's a matter of looking beyond what you physically see in a person, and how you, if they because I'm just, as I'm answering the question, I'm trying to think of an example and I can't, but to talk about it in sort of generic terms, if they're doing something that is slightly out of character.
Mm-hmm.
If they're doing something that's totally out of character, then it's obvious.
Yes.
If they're doing something that's slightly out of character, or if they're showing, this is a good one because this happened to me, if they're showing a lack of interest in stuff that they normally were interested in.
That's a great
When I
one.
was at my worst, I didn't watch a second of AFL footy. I wasn't into sport. I wasn't into going for walks. I loved my dog, but I didn't spend a lot of time with him. Those little things, because you lose a lot of interest in the things that are of interest to you normally when you're not well. It's like losing your taste for food. If you observe something like that, then that certainly can be a trigger. And maybe the extension to the question is, how do you then approach them?
Yes.
And this is a bit of a, I suppose it's a bit of a skill, but and this is so simplistic, but it's simply a matter of getting them privately, and not saying come over in the corner or, you know, let's go down for a coffee. It's just getting them at an appropriate time and simply saying, hey mate, everything okay? I just wondered if everything's all right. And if they want to open up, they will. If they don't, well, then maybe it's some more techniques. I don't know. But if they do open up, then, and the door opens or it's ajar, then, you know, again, you need to be careful on what you say to them and stuff. But then you might trigger or instigate a discussion that they have with you, not a discussion you have with them. And I'm not an expert at this. I haven't been trained in this, but I know it's more about letting them, because you mentioned it earlier, you know, when, you know, you can go to someone and you know you're not going to be judged.
Absolutely.
I think that's one of the big issues. And it may be that they just don't say anything, and which I did for years, and that's fine, and you'll never know until, you know, something happens. But I think if you ask them if they're okay, you know, not can I do anything for you, or you seem a bit off, it's more, are you okay? And if that allows them to have the trust in you to say, well, actually I'm not, then at least you've opened that door, and then it's another discussion. And I'm, you know, I wouldn't give the advice on that because I'm not an expert. I mean, I know what I'd do, but it's probably better that, you know, I don't know. I'm not quite sure.
I think that's wonderful advice. And, you know, can I just add, when I was going through a difficult time, just the person that was genuine enough and authentic to really ask and mean the question, hey, are you okay?
Yeah.
Not the general, hey, you okay? And off we go on another tangent.
Great point.
That even if I wasn't ready to speak, I remember walking away from someone thinking, someone cares.
Yeah.
Someone actually genuinely cares. I feel connected again to someone, because you do feel completely disconnected from everything you love, everything you're used to doing,
absolutely,
everyone around you. So that's, I think, to your point, is so important to ask the question in a genuine way and just be there.
And I'm glad you said that, and explained that so eloquently, because in a general sense, I guess that's what I sort of meant, but you explained it in a way where I think it was a bit better understood. And it's a really good point, that disconnection that you have when you're unwell. And I guess that's what I meant when I said I wasn't interested in footy anymore. And
No,
stuff
you said it perfectly. Yeah.
Yeah. But thanks, Nan. But yeah, but that's the disconnection is part of it. And, you know, it's not so much you lack trust with people, but you're just not interested. So your example is a great one, where even though you might not necessarily have opened up to that person, you walked away thinking, well, people do care. And maybe that instigated, I don't know your story, but maybe that instigated you to then seeking help elsewhere. So indirectly, that person's helped you. That, yeah, absolutely. Look, you know, and the reason the reason I sort of struggled a bit through that answer was because there is a bit of a process when you're dealing with someone who's unwell.
Yeah.
Now, I haven't been trained in that, but I feel confident enough to with my skills to be able to do it properly. I guess the reason I didn't go into it in detail, and maybe I don't have to explain this, but I'd like to, is because that in itself is it can be a bit dangerous as well, depending on who you're dealing with.
Yeah.
And depending on what you say to them, if they're in a really bad state and you don't handle that well. So I didn't really want to give any advice on that, because I think that's something that you probably need to seek. If you want to help someone, you probably need to seek someone who can help you with that. And, you know, and who that is, I'm not exactly sure, but someone who is sort of trained in, that's an area where I would advise getting some good training.
Yes.
An organisation getting, because there is a technique. Do you know what I mean? Like,
absolutely. There's a lot of mental health training out there. You know, even St. John's do a first aid mental health, which is so important. I'm so glad they brought that out.
Well, yeah. And look, and the reason I say that, and this is not for a free plug or anything, but, you know, David Moran has become a good friend of mine, and David runs a company called Mental Health Partners. And that's all they do. They train organisations on dealing with mental health issues within the workplace. And I remember him telling me that, and I haven't done his training, but and I probably should actually, but there is a specific technique when you're talking to people, as long as you're empathetic. That's probably the bottom line. You've got to be empathetic and listen.
Absolutely right.
That's what I'd be comfortable saying, but there is a bit of a process, yeah.
And yeah, I think, as you said, this is something that we need to tackle now as something that's urgent.
We do.
And get our men thriving again, because you know, they're a large part of our community, obviously. And
I'm not sure they're ever going to be the dominant species again, though, Nan. I think they're going to, I think that, which is fine. I think they're going to have to understand.
I'm hoping we can work beautifully alongside each other and understand each other's differences. And,
absolutely.
You know, because
I mean, you know, I'm a great fan of Lost in Space, which was made in the 60s, and there are many scenes where, you know, Professor Robinson, they're on a planet, and Professor Robinson and his offsider Don West come back to the spaceship, and, you know, the girls aren't working. They're not physically working, as in, you know, doing stuff on the spaceship. They're making tea, and they're doing the washing, and they're cleaning clothes, and they're, you know, doing all that. I don't think that's probably all that balanced, to be honest.
No, well, you know, can I say I'm horrible at cooking. I can put really healthy food together as far as salads, but I'm a terrible cook. I can't sew a button to save my life. I'm not a good ironer, so I don't fall very well into the category of
get your partner to do that.
That's a great. Actually, he is actually a much better cook. He's much better at ironing. He can sew.
Well, I hope he's watching. Make sure you look after Nant.
Oh, that's wonderful. But I'm a big believer in just letting people shine and be themselves, and allowing us to see each other's differences, because you know, we are meant to be different and unique.
Well, and that's a great topic for another time too, because I don't think, I think that's something that which is really, you know, mainly what we're talking about here, particularly with men, obviously, and that is, I think we're just frightened to be ourselves, and there's one thing that I have learned in the last couple of years, and that is that I am what I am. I'm trying to do the best I can, trying to get through. My life's totally different to what it was like, 5 years ago when I was earning a lot of money, driving a nice car. I was happily married. I had a beautiful house. I was going on holidays, all that stuff. I mean, that was irrelevant because I wasn't well. But, one thing I am a lot more comfortable in now is my skin, which to me is priceless.
It's the most important, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. I mean, that's not to say I still don't get nervous in certain situations, but I'm a lot more confident in just being myself, and I'm a lot more confident in the knowledge that there'll be people that don't like me, which I was horrified at when I was. I know we're wrapping up now, but when I was young, when I was 14, 15, I thought that I had this view that everyone had to like me, and because I was a people pleaser, and everyone had to like me. And I can remember at 18 years of age, I started working on the race course for a dear friend of ours, Jimmy Eason. Bless his heart, he's no longer with us. But I was working at the races, and one of the guys took a disliking to me. I was horrified.
Oh.
I was horrified. Well, why? Why would this person not like me? Who knows? Who cares? But and I guess that's a trait of a people pleaser. But
it is. That's a great point. And how many men feel like they need to please how many people during the day?
100%.
Their team, their bosses, their family, their friends.
You can't. And when you're going through mental health issues, if there's, because you suffer paranoia as well, so quite often you'll think someone doesn't like you, but they're actually fine.
They actually do.
They're just in a pooey mood.
Exactly. It has nothing to do with you, but you'll make up these fantastic stories in your head.
Oh, another topic for another day. But yeah, and you walk around for 2 hours worrying about it, or you'd bumped into them in the lift, and you'd said hello, and you'd smiled, and they'd said hi, and they looked down, and you worry about it for 2 hours. They haven't even given it a second thought now.
Exactly. I have to tell you a very quick story because it's perfect
Please
for this.
Do.
I was walking my little dog out the front, and we just went out for a very quick toilet stop, and it started raining. So I put my hood on top, and there was a very large man walking towards us, and it really started raining. So I said to her, okay, no, we're not sniffing anymore. We're going inside. And I just got in the gate as he walked past, and he actually said to me, I wasn't going to hurt you. And I thought, wow, what I just did had nothing to do with him. But I got inside quickly because it started raining too heavily. But that poor man thought that I had run inside because I was afraid of him, or, and I just thought, gosh, I wish I had had the chance to stop and say, no. It's because I did think, I really hope he doesn't give that a second thought.
Yeah. Well, he might have thought about it for another hour. Hope he didn't. But yeah.
we make up these stories in our head. People pass you in the street, and sometimes you can be in a zone, and a neighbor wouldn't have seen me, yet they walked straight past me. And I'll think, oh well, they don't like me. Have I annoyed them?
And people
they didn't even see me.
And people have got their own stuff going on.
Absolutely.
I mean, I happen to be a smiler, and I'm, even when I was unwell, I was a smiler. But now that I'm a lot better, still working on it, but I'm a lot better. I'm very happy-go-lucky. I make people feel comfortable. I'm a bit touchy-feely, not rudely, but I'm a bit touchy-feely. Actually,
I'm very touchy-feely. Don't worry about that.
Yeah, but I mean, on the arm.
Absolutely. I just like to touch people.
But not everyone's like that,
Yes.
and you can come up against someone who's just had an argument with his wife, or he's just lost his job, or he's just had to spend $1,000 on his car. And even now, if I say hello and I smile and they just sort of give me a bit of a hi, just for a second, I'll think, oh, that was a bit odd. But then I get on with it.
Yes.
4 years ago, it would have worried me for hours. But
absolutely.
So I'm still getting through that. But having said that, there are some people who don't care about that at all. They're extremely focused. But yeah,
the touch thing's interesting actually, because the masks have really challenged me, because I'm a people person like you. I like to see people's faces, and their expressions. And,
Yeah.
Being a touchy person, I generally always put out my hand to shake someone's hand.
Yeah.
And I've had to learn, oh, no, sorry, we don't do that anymore. And that's been quite challenging for me in a number of ways.
It's just, I mean, with what we're going through, Nat, that's just another thing that it's affected.
Absolutely.
It's another thing, and I mean, it's obviously health with people who are catching COVID is the most important thing, but the ripple effect on everything that we do now is widening, and that's another great example, and that's
the
holding
loss
you
of
back.
Connection with our community.
Well, it's holding you back from doing what you naturally do, and that's just a little thing that 6 months, 12 months ago we wouldn't have even given a second thought.
Absolutely, but now you've got to think about it. A
Totally.
natural reaction to be polite is to put out my hand and shake someone's hand, and now I'm thinking, oh no, I can't do that. And obviously for men it's a natural reaction to put out their hand. And
absolutely. Yep. So, it's widespread, and all of those little things affect us in small ways. Some of the things we're having to deal with affect us in big ways, like losing a job or having to lock again for 6-7 weeks or a week or 2 weeks, whatever it might be, whatever it is. But that one is a small one, but it just builds. It's like that stacking,
You're so right.
It all adds up, now.
These little things build and stack up, and they become bigger things.
Having said all of that, how are things after we've just chatted for the last hour? I mean, apart from all that, is everything okay in the Nat household?
Everything is wonderful. Thank you so much for asking. And thank you so much for being here with me. I really appreciate your time, Mark. I'd love to be able to chat with you again about this. We both really believe that it's such an important topic that needs 100%. To be addressed in a lot of ways. And look, hopefully the more we all do, the more we can make an impact and help our men.
That would be my pleasure, Nan. And what you're doing is a great thing. And it's everyone doing their bit. And we're all most of us are just trying to help. As I said at the very start, I don't stand on a pedestal and say I'm 100% better now because I went to rehab and I've still got things I'm dealing with. And, but I am not the only one, and I'm sad about that in a way because I don't want anyone else to be suffering. But to keep me sane, I've got to understand that it's just not me, it's everyone, or it's a lot of people, and we just have to get through it the best we possibly can. And what you're doing is helping. I mean, I'll head off in a second and have tea and sit with my dog, and I'll feel good about this because we spoke about something that we're passionate about. And I mean, sure, we spoke about a lot of stuff that's not great, but hopefully we gave some good advice and inspired someone. Hopefully,
absolutely. Hopefully, someone, when they watch this, they get some benefit from it, and
they'll be watching this, will they? I should have worn some makeup. Damn.
They'll be watching this as well. You look fantastic. Don't worry.
Well, you got good lighting. My lighting, I look as though I've been out in the sun for about 6 months. But anyway, I've got this huge, great big light in front of me. I sort of feel as though I'm back in the TV studio. So I'm sort of feeling good about
that. Love it. Thank you so much, Mark. I'll look forward to hopefully seeing you again soon.
Yeah.
And really appreciate all your insights, and so will all our viewers.
Yeah, bless you. Thanks, Nan.
Thank you.